Hey everyone, today we're talking about a mysterious and notorious group from history, the Assassins. You've probably heard about them in movies and video games, but who were they really? Let's break it down. So the Assassins, also known as the Nizari Ismailis, were a group of Shiite Muslims who rose to power in Persia and Syria around the 11th century. They were a formidable force until the Mongols took them down in the mid-13th century. These guys were famous for their strategy of targeting and eliminating key opposition figures. Picture this, knife-wielding teams carrying out daring missions, all while hiding out in their fortified hilltop castles. Pretty intense, right? Now you might be wondering where the name, assassin, comes from. It's believed to have originated from their enemies, who called them hashish eaters or hashish in Arabic. The story goes that these assassins consumed hashish, a psychoactive drug, before going on their missions. This name stuck and evolved into the term assassin we use today, which now means someone who murders for political or religious reasons. But here's where it gets interesting. There's a debate about whether the assassins actually used hashish or if it was just a way for their enemies to explain their incredible abilities and unwavering commitment. Some think the drug use was just a myth, created to demonize them and justify their deadly efficiency. So, why were they considered heretics? The Ismailis were a Shiite Muslim sect that formed in the 8th century after splitting from other Muslims. They followed Ismail, the eldest son of the 6th Imam, Jafar al-Sadiq. Even though Ismail died before his father, his followers believed he was the rightful successor. This put them at odds with other Shiites who supported Ismail's brother, Musa al-Kazim. Because of this split, the Ismailis were often called the Seveners. The Ismailis were waiting for the Mahdi, a messianic figure who would bring peace and justice. They believed in the coming of the Qim, who would usher in the resurrection. This made them heretical in the eyes of other Muslim groups, including both other Shiites and the Sunni majority under the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. In the late 11th century, the Ismailis themselves split into two groups after a leadership dispute. The eastern branch, the Nizari Ismailis, supported Abu Mansur Nizar and became more militant. These Nizaris are the ones who earned the infamous reputation as the Assassins. And now, let's dive deeper into their territories and the intriguing strategies they used to maintain their power. The Assassins, led initially by Hasan ibn al-Sabbah, a missionary from Egypt, started setting up bases in Iran and formed a tight-knit political and religious community. Think of them as a medieval version of secret agents with fortified hilltop castles. Between 1130 and 1151, they managed to acquire several strongholds, especially in northern Syria's Jabal al-Zaria region. One key fortress they took over was Misyaf in the Orontes Valley around 1140, which became their mini-state's capital in Syria. Interestingly, the Assassins often found themselves in a delicate balancing act with the Crusaders. After the failure of the Second Crusade to reclaim Edessa from Muslim control, the Assassins were left relatively unchallenged in northern Syria. They even paid tribute to the Crusader states at times to maintain their independence and occasionally supported them against the Sunni Muslims in the region. By the 13th century, the Nizari Ismailis had spread out to places like Egypt, Yemen, southern Iraq, southwest Iran, and Afghanistan. Despite being isolated and surrounded by enemies, their impregnable castles provided excellent protection. Their leader, known as the Old Man of the Mountain, a title especially linked to Sheikh Rashid al-Din Shinan, became a legendary figure in the West thanks to the Crusaders. One of their most important retreats was Alamut Castle, nestled in the Alamut Valley south of the Caspian Sea. Nicknamed the Eagle's Nest, Alamut was taken by the Assassins in 1090 and served as their headquarters in Iran, home to their Grand Master. So, what was their strategy? The Assassins didn't have massive military strength, so they focused on a tactic that struck fear into their enemies, targeted assassinations. Their weapon of choice was usually a knife, and they often carried out their missions in crowded places to maximize the impact. The assassins, known as fidain or suicide commandos, didn't expect to survive their missions, demonstrating a chilling level of commitment to their cause. The reasons why these men were willing to die for their leader remain a bit of a mystery. Marco Polo, the famous Venetian explorer, offers a colorful explanation in his travels. According to Polo, the assassins' leader, referred to as Al-Edin, created a paradise-like garden filled with beautiful palaces, delicious fruits, and lovely damsels skilled in music and dancing. Young recruits were drugged with opium and transported to this garden, where they indulged in all sorts of pleasures, making them believe they had experienced paradise. When they woke up back in the real world, their leader convinced them that following his orders would guarantee them a return to this heavenly place. A Chinese official and traveler, Changde, provided a similar account in his 263 text, Shiji. He described how the assassins lured strong men with material goods and intoxicants, entertaining them with music and beauty in a secretive basement. Once these recruits woke up from their intoxicated state, they were taught that dying as an assassin would grant them eternal joy and comfort. And now, let's talk about some of their most infamous targets and the impact of their deadly efficiency. One of the most notable victims of the assassins was Nizam al-Mulk, the powerful vizier of Baghdad. He was murdered on October 14, 1092. Another high-profile assassination was that of Raymond II, Count of Tripoli, in 1152. Raymond had likely angered the assassins by granting land near their base to the Knights Hospitaller. His murder led to a brutal and ultimately unsuccessful massacre of all indigenous Easterners in Tripoli as authorities tried to find the culprits. Then there was Conrad of Montferrat, who was assassinated on April 28, 1192, just days after being declared king of Jerusalem. He was attacked by two assassins disguised as monks, who approached him with a letter before fatally stabbing him. Some even suspected Richard the Lionheart of England might have been involved in plotting this assassination, given the political turmoil at the end of the Third Crusade. The assassins were so effective that sometimes no one was certain they were responsible. For example, Maudud, the Atabeg of Mosul, was killed on October 2, 1113, while walking home from prayers. His assassin was caught and executed, but it remained only a suspicion that the assassins were behind it. This uncertainty leaves us wondering how many mysterious deaths were actually their doing, and how many were wrongly attributed to them. One near victim was the famous Sultan Saladin. A staunch Sunni Muslim, Saladin provoked the assassins by threatening to crucify all Muslim heretics. They attempted to kill him twice. The first attempt in 1175 failed completely. The second, in 1176, saw 4 assassins get close enough to injure him slightly before being killed by his bodyguards. Saladin's response was swift and severe, besieging the assassins' fortress at Musyaf. Yet, suddenly, he abandoned the siege. Stories suggest assassins had sneaked into his tent and left a knife or a poisoned cake under his pillow as a chilling warning. Another tale tells of an emissary convincing Saladin's guards they would kill the Sultan if asked, highlighting the assassin's ability to infiltrate even the most secure entourages. Regardless of the true version, Saladin got the message and negotiated a non-aggression pact with the assassins. The assassins' reputation for eliminating powerful figures was so fearsome that rulers began to take extreme precautions. Saladin, for instance, started sleeping in a specially built wooden tower instead of a tent, and would only allow those he personally recognized near him. Many leaders wore chainmail under their robes at all times, constantly on edge, knowing they could be next. And now, let's move on to the dramatic end of their reign, brought about by the unstoppable force of the Mongols. Mongol Khan, the great Khan of the Mongol Empire, appointed his younger brother Hulagu as viceroy of Iran, and in 1256, Hulagu set out with an army to expand the Mongol Empire westward. One of his targets was the assassins, who had made the mistake of assassinating a Mongol commander. Using advanced siege techniques and formidable catapults capable of hurling gunpowder bombs, the Mongols systematically dismantled the Assassins' seemingly impregnable hilltop castles, including their famed stronghold, Alamut. The Mongols' strategy was brutal and effective. They would often carry their siege equipment piece by piece up adjacent peaks to gain the high ground, bombarding the Assassins from above. Despite fierce resistance from the Assassins, who had their own defensive weapons, the Mongols eventually prevailed. The Persian historian At-Malik Juvayni provides a vivid description of these battles, highlighting the deadly precision of the Mongol onslaught. A key moment in this campaign was the capture and subsequent parading of the Assassin Grand Master, Rukn al-Din Shah. The Mongols used him as leverage to demoralize the defenders of various castles. Ultimately, Shah was executed in a manner typical for those who defied Mongol supremacy, trampled to death by his guards. His death marked the effective end of the Assassin stronghold in Persia. The fall of the Assassin castles was followed by a massacre of their inhabitants, and those few who survived were often sold into slavery. This brutal campaign all but exterminated the Nizari Ismailis in Persia. However, a few isolated strongholds in Syria held out a little longer until they were subdued by the Mamluks under Sultan al-Zahir Baibars in the 1270s. Despite their near eradication, the legacy of the Assassins persisted. Some surviving members of the sect eventually moved to India, where they established a small community. The Nizari Ismailis continued as a branch of Shiite Islam, and their leadership evolved, eventually becoming represented by the Aga Khans of Iran from the early 19th century. The current leader, Prince Shah Karim al-Husseini, Aga Khan IV, continues to lead the Nizari Ismailis today,